One of the books that I read and reread from time to time is Pascal Boyer's Religion Explained. Boyer is an anthropologist, and what he's doing in this is, as much as anything, explaining the way the human mind works. We've learned a lot in the last, in my lifetime, about the brain, and that has accumulated, and at least initially, what his work is predicated on is that the way the human mind works has religious and factual information kinds of consequences. One of the things that happens when information is given is that all of us, to a certain extent, mentally chew on it. We expand it based on sort of internal templates. So, for instance, if we are introduced to a new animal, we're given its name, we may also be given it the way it reproduces. So maybe it does live birth, maybe it drops eggs to reproduce. Some of the internal things that go on when we receive that information is we realize that we now know how that entire species reproduces. The assumption is that if we know how one reproduces, then we know how the whole species reproduces. And for the most part, that's true. I'm sure there might be some exceptions somewhere. But in our mental process, we take in the information we get and we infer a whole lot of things from that. And it's in this inference system that Boyer builds an understanding of just exactly how religious life works. Now, anthropologists know that around the world there are lots of different religions, and people come at religion quite differently. But our minds all work very much the same way. And that means that as we grow up in our culture, whatever it is, and we receive information about our culture, which is religious information is cultural information, we process that in a particular way. And the way we process it really determines kind of what gets into our database and what doesn't. It's an interesting idea, I think, and an important one, I think, because the task then doesn't become sort of looking at all these religions and trying to figure out how they all, how the idea of religion fits, but it makes it more of an internal, individual kind of thing, where the way the mind works makes religion possible, because the mind infers in particular ways, and therefore it makes choices. These are unconscious choices. These are below the level of our conscious mind, but they work out pretty. He uses the example of an animal. Say we're introduced, and the one he uses is a walrus. We're introduced to a walrus, we get the name, but what happens in the brain is it's kind of submitted to a template that is animal. And within that template, there are certain assumptions. And one of them is if we know how this particular individual reproduces, we know how all of the individuals in that community reproduce. Now, we're particularly lucky in that regard because life is a unity. All life on the planet Earth is related to each other through genetics, through desoxyribonucleic acid, DNA. Now, there are some modifications of that, but we all sort of come from the same reality. And that creates, apparently, some kind of structure in the way we receive information. We receive information and then we infer from that information much more. We don't just take in a fact and hold it usually. We take it in and we fit it somewhere. And where we fit it creates inferences for that information and sort of fills out, at least partially, what we know about it. Well, I'm still I've read this book a number of times, and I'm still wrestling with that idea that it is the inferential mind that we have that really makes religious life part of who we are. Now, I happen to be a retired Episcopal priest, so I've spent my adult life, most of it, about 40 years of it anyway, in ordained ministry, and that obviously means I have some interest in explaining religion. And actually, it explains a lot. And I'll give you an example. One of the congregations I served, I was the head pastor, rector, whatever terminology you would use, and I was going to the classes, the Sunday school classes, to see what was going on. And the junior high class was having a lesson about the Holy Spirit. And in the process of the lesson, as the teacher was giving information about the Holy Spirit, the boys in the back had apparently found a feather, and they were wafting the feather up and blowing it, and it was sort of floating around, and it was sort of passing around. Which reminded me that pneuma, really from the same word that really in Latin refers to the lungs, to the air, the pneuma, the spirit. So we ended up using the feather as an example, and yet the boys were doing something that very much reminded me of what Boyer was saying, which is that each of us takes the information and uses it in different ways, and but depending on our particular templates and and we make our own inferences. If it becomes part of us, we have absorbed it. And in that absorption, we have expanded the information beyond what we were given at the time. And that's, I think, the essence of what Boyer is saying about how religion and most of life evolves for us. That's what we do. We take the information we're given and we infer from it things about life. Anyway, it's a joyous way to think about that. Of course, Pascal Boyer is a great name. Pascal was about 3 centuries ago was a great religious thinker. So Pascal Boyer, a great anthropologist thinking about religion. This understanding of the human mind obviously transcends just the anthropological concern about religion. It also refers to pretty much what we do in terms of information. We infer, we expand upon it. We instantly and unconsciously know more about the subject in our minds than we receive as information. And if it becomes a permanent part of us, that information then becomes... Now, is there a possibility of error? Of course there is. But we'll save that for another time. Anyway, Pascal Boyer's Religion Explained. I believe the book was, from 2001, so it's not that old. Anyway, blessings.